Am I going to knock that thing off? Shake it around. My name's Rich M., and I'm an alcoholic. I'm a person who's recovered from this disease of alcoholism for 33 years and 7 months. My sobriety date's July the 11th, 1985. And only through the loving arms of Alcoholics Anonymous and a sponsor who never gave up on me and gave me tremendous guidance, and learning how to incorporate the 12-step recovery program in my personal life, I'm still sober. I haven't had a drink for all that time, and so I'm a miracle. I still come to meetings. I love coming to meetings. My best friends, my closest friends, my most trusted friends, almost without exception, are AA members. And it's because of the kind of rigorous self-honesty and true caring about each other that's so. Now, that's not to say that we don't have all kinds in here. It's in here. We got con men, professional victims, and all sorts of folks in between. But we all have a way of coming back around to the best side of ourselves the longer we keep hanging around here and working on this program. I'm an alcoholic because when I was 12 years old, I had enough opportunities to experiment around with various forms of alcohol so that I knew that there was something that would happen if I got enough of it in me to make me feel a certain way that I didn't know any other way to feel. And so as a result, I stashed away a bottle of antihistamine that was in a liquid form, and it was from a veterinary pharmacy. My daddy was a veterinarian, and I stole it from his pharmacy down at the dog and cat hospital. And it had 18% alcohol. It was elixir of antihistamine with 18% alcohol, which is 36 proof, and it was a half a pint bottle, and I was 12 years old and weighed in at about 121 pounds. And be honest with you, it had a little bit of codeine in there too. And I will tell you that a half a pint of 36 proof with a few grains of codeine in it will set a 12-year-old free. And I went down to the back pasture, which had a pretty good slope on it and a lot of red clover. I remember this like it happened yesterday. And we had a milk cow, and she was laying in a patch of red clover on an April night with a full moon and a cool breeze. And I kicked her and made her get up so I could lay down on the warm earth where she'd been, and had that aroma of the crushed red clover and the blooms coming up. And I drank that half a pint of 36 proof antihistamine with codeine in it. And I came to realize how God had intended for me to feel. And a little voice in my head said, "Richie boy, from now on, for the rest of your life, you need to do this. This is beautiful." And the fact that I remember it with that clarity tells me that that was a very, very significant event to me. There are not a lot of memories that I have that are that clear. Maybe when I had my sexual epiphany, it might have been that clear, but very few other things made that kind of an impression on me that made me feel that good. And there's no mystery to me as an alcoholic. There's no mystery to me at all why I drank, and I suspect why folks in here drank. I drank because it made me feel good. And I loved that stuff. I had so much fun. The quality of my life was so excellent that I just couldn't imagine living without it. Now, I can fast forward, because that qualifies me as a real alcoholic right there. And I learned how to make homebrew wine and all kinds of stuff when I was coming up. My daddy died of cancer when I was 15. I left home when I was 17, worked my way through college, worked my whole life working my way through something. And along the way, I found ways to get booze and a few other mood-altering substances. I liked cocktails with different kinds of mind and mood-altering substances. But go forward. I'm in graduate school at UCLA, working on a U.S. Public Health Service pre-doctoral fellowship on my PhD, teaching at a community college, working at the VA hospital doing research, and cheating on my wife. So I was busy. That would wear you out. Something happened that got me furloughed from graduate school and placed in a hospital setting. And it wasn't an acute care hospital with medical problems. It was a nut house. And I stayed up in there for a while, and I did real well while I was in there. By the time the first week was over, they elected me mayor. I was proud, and we were making piggy banks in there. There was a factory down the street that made plastic bottles. They were 1-gallon bleach bottles, and they had a quality control thing there. And if they had a leak in them somewhere, if it was real bad, they sent them down to the nut house, and the nuts got to draw a little piggy on them and make a piggy bank out of them. And I made the best piggy banks. They voted my piggy banks the most artistic. So I was an overachiever. And then a guy told me that the drunks were over on the other side of that fence. And everybody kind of looked down on the drunks. And I went over and started talking to them. And the next day, a guy came to visit me. And he stayed there for about 2 hours and just talked and talked. I couldn't hardly get a word in edgewise. And I found out later on, Evelyn, he was a AA member doing service work. And when he got done talking to me for 2 hours, he said, I think you might be an alcoholic. And I thought, I wonder how the hell he knows I hadn't got to say anything. But then he said the magic words. He said, they might let you out of here if you tell them you're an alcoholic. I summoned my psychiatrist later that same day. And he wrote orders to get me out of there. And I shot right down to the liquor store, got me a pint of whiskey, and went on. I did what I was supposed to do. Got back into graduate school, finished my PhD, published it, and they furloughed me again without letting me meet with my committee to defend my PhD. And they never let me back in. I didn't get in the club. The reason that I failed after all those years of working that hard and getting jobs and awards and scholarships and fellowships is because of my alcoholism. And my sense of myself was that I was a scientist, a bright young scientist on his way to the top. I was going to be a college professor, have a bevy of graduate students, and do brain research. By the way, interestingly enough, what my specialty was is psychopharmacology, which is a big word for drugs of the mind. That's what I was the most interested in. And I'd been interested in them since I was a little kid. I don't know why I was interested in them as a little kid. Everything about them fascinated me. I knew where you could get ephedra out there in the woods from ephedra plants and make speed, and I knew everything Ewell Gibbons knew about getting the aspirin out of willow bark and stuff like that. And I had a little file on that stuff when I was in junior high school. If I came over to your house, I wanted to know if you had anything in there that was beverage alcohol. I wasn't going to steal it from you. I was just curious. Have you got, what is that? Is that old crow or old buzzard or wild turkey? What is that? You know, so after I got blackballed out of academics and science, I had to make a living. I was going through a divorce. And I got a job selling drugs. Now, I had done that before, but it was a subterranean enterprise. This one here was for an actual pharmaceutical company. I had to wear a shirt and tie to go to work. And I did really, really well at that. Man, I like that capitalism. You get paid on a commission. And I didn't know you could make that much money that easy. And but then something happened. I was coming home, getting ready to go home from my office in South El Monte out in the San Gabriel Valley out in Los Angeles. And my theory back then was face traffic with courage. Get drunk before you drive. It was dangerous out there. Bumper to bumper, 65 miles an hour is terrifying. But if I was smooth, it wasn't so bad. And I got into a crash. I don't say it was an accident, because when you drink like that and go driving, it's a crash. It's going to happen. You just don't know which time you're driving it, it's going to happen. Fortunately for me, I hit somebody that was a professional race car driver trainer out there at Ontario Racetrack, and he saw what was about to happen and got himself cattywampus in front of me, so he spun instead of me hitting him dead on and killing some people, and took out 3 sections of the center divider, and they towed 5 cars away, and 4 folks went to the hospital, but nobody died. And the judge made me listen to the impact story of each of those families, and that was difficult to endure. But it didn't stop me from drinking. It did stop me from working for that pharmaceutical company, because they fired my ass. But that's all right, because I got me another job selling surgical staplers and implant knees and hips and stuff like that. And I was more successful at that and quicker than I was in the pharmaceutical business. And the drinking kept going. The drinking kept going, and I would try to disguise it. And I know today that I wasn't doing a very good job, but people tolerated me because I was productive. My employer left me alone. And the surgeons that I was working with left me alone because I was able to help them. So when I was a kid, I grew up in Hot Springs, Arkansas. I'm a hillbilly from western Arkansas, and we had a racetrack, thoroughbred racetrack out there, and I used to go to the racetrack a lot. Skip track in the spring meet was in February, and football season was over, and I didn't like going to track in February, so I went to a different track. And I'd read the handicappers, and there was one kind of handicap comment on certain kind of horses that said, fast early foot. Fast early foot means you get out of that gate really fast, and on the first 6 furlongs you're way ahead of everybody else, and by the time the race is over, you're dead last. That was me, fast early foot. Man, oh man, I could really perform until I was successful and I started feeling like I was in control of everything, and then, boom, I was drunk again and messed it up. So I became a serial career killer. I would have a job and it would last 1 to 2 years, and then I would blow it up. And I'd go get me another job and blow it up, and get me another job and blow it up. And finally, I got to a point where I was unemployable, so I had to go into business for myself. And that was really fun, because I could drink and drug as much as I wanted to, and actually made more money than I'd ever made in my life. And I thought, man, this is working out fine now. But something happened. The people that was working for me all quit. They came in my office and they said, "You're taking this company down, and we don't want you to do that. You need to get some help. You're the company lush." That was their word, lush. You're the company lush. I said, "You people can't talk to me like that. I sign your paycheck. You're fired, all of you, every damn one of you." And they said, "Okay, but you still need to get some help." They wouldn't leave my office. So I went. I went to a treatment center. I had my a secretary call around and find out where I could get some help. And I went to Raleigh Hills Hospital in Newport Beach, California. They had a 2-week cure. All the rest of them you had to go for 28 days. They had a 2-week cure, and it was called counter conditioning. It wasn't all this fluffy spirituality bullshit. It was counter conditioning, some good solid psychological principles. You drink what you like, and then you have to take some Ipecac, and Ipecac is makes you puke. So they start you out on your favorite drink. You know, I like single malt scotch if I had my choice, because I was a connoisseur of booze by then. And they let me have some single malt scotch the first time. And then the second time, they worked their way down to Chinese bourbon, which is like diesel fuel. So when I'm drinking and puking every other day, they got to make you drink and puke. And I already knew how to puke, so I mean, I didn't get nothing out of that treatment center. But they did have one thing in there. They had some AA folk come in there. And we would sit in the lounge in the patient's lounge area. And they didn't really have a meeting. They just come in there and they would share with the patients in there, and I was one of the patients. They would share about their story about how their drinking had put them in a position of unmanageability, and that they was powerless over alcohol and all the terrible things that happened to them for them to hit bottom. And I listened to them folks, and I thought, boy, this AA thing, this is a good thing for people like that. Thank God I ain't like that. Thank God I'm not that bad. And if they can't drink at all, well, I'm going to just have to cut back the wine after dinner. But if they got a fatal disease, I've just got a little sniffle of it. You know, that was my diagnosis. So when I got out of there, I switched over to wine with dinner. And it turned out that dinner was pretty much a 24-hour deal. I was drinking wine all day long and didn't work out too good. And then I had some legal problems. And this time, some things happened while I was in a blackout. And I was looking at some serious criminal charges. Basically, malicious mayhem, assault and battery on a police officer, causing grievous harm to a police officer, and a few other things. And they said, and I came out of my blackout in a rubber room down in the Newport Beach Sheriff's Substation in Orange County. And the same people that had got me to treatment 6 months earlier, they had called a lawyer and sent a lawyer over this time. And he said, you're looking at 32 months in Soledad prison. And I said, well, okay, what you going to do to help me out of that? You know, you working for me, dude. And he said, well, I'll talk to the DA and come back and see what I can work out and come back and tell you. So he came back and he said the cops said that they'll drop the charges, and the DA said he'll take a dismissal if you'll go back to treatment and stay sober. So I processed that data for about 2 microseconds. I said, I'll do it. Didn't take me long. You know, a drunk's quick about stuff like that. I knew what to do. I knew what to say. So, yeah, I'll go back there. So I did. I went back there. And this time I worked just as hard as I did the first time to not get anything out of it. But they tricked me and they snuck a little stuff in there. And they gave me a vivid description of what was going to happen to me if I kept drinking. Now, you can go to page 21 in the big book, Alcoholics Anonymous, where it says, but what about the real alcoholic? And then there's a long, well, it's not long unless you're still in the fog. There's a narrative that describes a real alcoholic, and that's me. That's me. So there was I dropped my guard some kind of way, and they stuck that information in my head with Velcro, so it actually stuck. I don't exactly know how you do that, but they did that to me. They planted that seed and it wouldn't die. And for the next 5 years, I continued to drink. I wasn't drugging much anymore, just drinking. I started out drinking, I ended up drinking. I did some pretty exotic drugging along the way, so you could say, technically, according to the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual, I'm a garbage head. But booze was the beginning and the end. It was the alpha and the omega. And for the next 5 years, I continued to drink out of control. But the problem was it didn't work anymore. And the problem was I knew what was happening to me. The problem was that everything they told me was going to happen to me happened to me. And they told me sooner or later I would wish for the end. And I started to wish for the end. And suicide looked like a really good option compared to what I was facing. And so I reached a point of despair. I was, well, I might as well tell you, I was actually living the life of a desperado. I had some additional legal problems that I didn't want to confront. These were not stuff that happened in a blackout. These were intentional white-collar criminal acts that I had been getting away with for a while, and they was on to me. And we went through stagflation, and interest rates went way up, and my business went belly up, and I was exposed for what I was doing, and I knew what was coming. And so instead of facing the consequences, I went to the embassy down there in Los Angeles and got a visa and for Australia, and I became a gold prospector out back in the desert. And I was a gold prospector for a couple years out there, and then I snuck back in. I was a very successful gold prospector. So I had a pretty good poke, and I came back in the USA and changed my name and learned how to count cards. I learned how to play blackjack at a high skill level and did that for a while. My drinking messed that up. Then I did some other stuff that you don't have to use your social security number to be able to make a living, and I did that for a while. I was writing term papers for college students. That's what I was doing. And I can write. I can do research in the library and write. And I'd stay drunk 2 or 3 days a week and write 2 or 3 days a week. And, and I got by pretty well doing that. But eventually, I came up for air, and I got a job that had to use my social security number. And the IRS cropped up. Now, I'm going to tell you something. The IRS is the most loyal institution in this country. Your mama might forget about you, but the IRS will not. They will stick with you. The IRS is like a dog that won't die. It's your best friend. And so I had to meet with the IRS. But before I had to meet with the IRS, I had a failed suicide attempt. And I was living with, I think it was number 3. I would get married like I'd get jobs, fast, early foot. I think it was number 3. And she'd come and pull me out of a motel room where I had gone to drink myself to death. And I almost made it, too. I had 4 half-a-gallons of Canadian Club whiskey and 2 cases of beer and a box of crackers in case I got hungry while I was drinking myself to death. And evidently I got in a blackout, got telephonitis, and old Herb found out where I was and come pull me out of there. The next day I was just buzzing, and she started getting dark, and she got in her old Ford Fairlane. And I said, "Where are you going?" She said, "I'm going to Al-Anon." And a little light went off in my head. I said, "Al-Anon, isn't that where they have the AA?" And she said, "Yeah, they have it in another room." And I said, "Can I go with you?" And she said, "Well, I ain't going to make you go with me, but if you want to go, get in the back seat." She was already a black belt Al-Anon after 2 meetings. well, you know, I was just about dead when she married me, so she couldn't be too damn swift. You know, it'd be like, oh, I found that perfect house to move into, and the fire department's there trying to put the fire out, and it's half burnt down. That's what I'm looking for, honey. Let's get married. So she wasn't playing with a full deck either. But so let me tell you, I need to tell you about this. I went to my first AA meeting that night in Jonesboro, Arkansas. I went to the Jonesboro group on a Thursday night. And that is where my miracle started, with this fellowship. And I've been a member in good standing ever since that night. I was fortunate enough to go into a group that when they had a newcomer come in, no matter what they had scheduled, it could have been a speaker meeting, it could have been a discussion meeting, it could have been a short talk meeting. What this group did was they did what they call throw a meeting. It's like throwing a party. They threw a meeting for me. They gathered around me. It was in a double wide trailer, and they had in the long way of it, they had a podium up there, and then they had rows of chairs. I came in there, and a guy looked at me. His name's Donald G. He had coveralls on, and he knew I was new. I didn't know how he knew I was new. He said, "You been having trouble with booze?" And I credited him with great insight. You know, hell, I still had flies buzzing around me and smelled like Hogan's goat, but he put his arm around me. I didn't want anybody to touch me. I didn't like that feeling of him putting his arm around me. He said, "Well, you're in the right place. We'll love you till you can love yourself." And then I started pulling away from him. He said, "Would you like a cup of coffee?" And I said, "Sure." He gave me a cup of coffee. And you know how quick you are, the jittery you are when you're 24 hours past your last drunk, you stayed drunk a week. You know, you're quick. And that jumped with cup. I had the flyaways. That's what I called it. They were the flyaways. I used to get them at work. You know, I'd get my pen about 11 o'clock in the morning. I'd be writing on something. Boom, that pen would fly out of my hand. It's lunchtime. I got to go get me a triple martini for lunch right now. Well, I had the flyaways, and that cup of coffee flew away. And it was like, "That's okay. Don't worry about it. Come on over here and sit down." They got me another cup that had about a half inch in the bottom of it. And they had a little drunk on each side of me, and one in front and one in back, and they set me right down in front of the podium in the second row. And the chairman of the meeting come out there and he said, "Tonight we're going to have short talks, and the topic's going to be what it was like when I came to my first AA meeting." And I sat there, and these folks came up there one at a time. He said, "You got 2 to 5 minutes, one at a time, and looked right in my eyes, looked right at me, and talked about themselves, where they were and how they felt and what was going on when they came to their first AA meeting." And the folks, it was like they'd been reading my mail. They knew way more about me than I knew about myself. They told me truth about themselves that had the ring of truth for me. And when that meeting was over, I knew without a shadow of a doubt that I had discovered something that was as precious as booze. I knew that I was in the right place. I knew that I fit in. I knew that I belonged there. I found out where I needed to be. And a little drunk came up to me. She was about that tall, about 5'2". She was probably in her late 20s, and she got out a envelope and wrote on the back Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, and where each meeting was and what time it met. They didn't even have a schedule in there. If they did, I didn't get it. But she gave me that envelope, and I went to every one of those meetings, every one of them. And I didn't just do it for the next week. I did it for the next 2 years. Nobody told me to go to 90 meetings in 90 days. I wouldn't have made it. I went to 1,000 meetings in 1,000 days. That's what I needed to do, and I knew I needed to do that. I started going to noon meetings because I didn't have a job, and that's where people went when they didn't have anywhere to go. And there was a lot of newbies in there, 4 or 5 newbies and 2 or 3 old timers in there, and we had some really good discussions like new folks have. And so I fit right in with that crowd. I really did. And they started talking about the steps, and they started talking about sponsorship. And I went to one of those discussion meetings when that whole home group was there, and they said, does anybody have a topic that they would like to get discussed? And I said, yeah, I would. How do you pick a sponsor? What do you need a sponsor for? I wanted to know. Because they had something that I didn't have, and they were talking about something I didn't understand. So I heard a whole discussion about sponsorship, and I learned a lot about sponsorship. The main thing I learned by the time I got home was the folks that had been sober and that were kind of sane and a lot of fun and enjoying sobriety, they all had sponsors. And one of them said, a sponsor is not a lending officer at a bank. A sponsor is not an employment agency. A sponsor is not a social worker or a nurse. A sponsor is a coach, and they teach you how to work the steps. And that got my attention because I could understand that. It wasn't a flowery talk. It was real straightforward, nuts and bolts. What they don't do and what they do. And I understand it that way today. If you ask me today to tell you how do I pick a sponsor, I'll tell you 2 things. Number 1, pick a sponsor who has a sponsor, and pick a sponsor whose sponsor helped them work the steps. If they have a sponsor that helped them work the steps, they will be a sponsor who can help you work the steps. They're not trying to make it up as they go along. So, and I still believe that. It's the two most important things to look for. So they said you got to work the steps. So I started paying close attention to meetings where they were talking about the steps. And when I was somewhere where I needed assistance, I would say, how'd you do your 4th step? We have a meeting about that. So I was using the fellowship, and I was sorting through what made sense to me. And I got some crazy stuff too. Somebody said, well, I'll show you. I got a sponsor, by the way, Jake. And Jake, we had a meeting about sponsorship, and Jake, I remember Jake said, well, I've been sober for 2 years, and nobody's asked me to sponsor him, and I felt sorry for him. Everybody said, go get Charles so-and-so. He sponsors a bunch of people, and he's been sober 13 years. But I felt sorry for Jake, so I asked Jake to be my sponsor, and after I did, I found out why nobody asked him to sponsor. Jake was great, though. You know what? He wouldn't let me. He would make me meet him somewhere and take me to out-of-town meetings. And I got introduced to Alcoholics Anonymous all around northeast Arkansas. So I met a lot more folks in AA, and I heard more discussions, and then it wasn't too long after that Robert came into my life, and I went to Robert and asked him to be my sponsor, and Robert said, why are you asking me to be your sponsor? And I never expected him to say something like that. I thought he'd go, sure, I'll be your sponsor. But he said, what do you want me to be your sponsor for? And it caught me off guard, and I heard myself saying, I don't know where it came from. I heard myself saying, everybody you sponsor is sober. He said, there's a reason for that, because I take sponsorship seriously, and I take the program of Alcoholics Anonymous seriously, and if you don't, I won't sponsor you. So I'm like, pick me. That's the way I want to be. He said, I'm not even going to talk to you about it. I'm going to give you 2 weeks, and then I want you to call me up. He said, I'm going to give you 2 questions to think about, and I do not want you to answer them now. We're going to talk about the answers that you have for me in 2 weeks. I said, okay. He said, the first question is, are you willing to go to any length to stay sober? Well, I knew the answer to that without thinking 2 weeks. The second one, he says, are you willing to never say no to Alcoholics Anonymous if the fellowship asks you to do something? Unless you're physically unable or you got a prior commitment, are you willing to never say no to Alcoholics Anonymous? If the fellowship in some way or another asks you to do something for the fellowship. He was talking about service work. I didn't know that. I never heard of service work. I found out later on. So he lived in Little Rock, and at that time I was still living in Jonesboro. So I went to Little Rock to meet Robert. I called him like he told me to. And he said, "Where are you?" And I told him where I was. And he gave me directions how to get to his house. Well, I'd been an outside salesman. And I had one of those page-by-page books. That's before we had GPSs. And it had the whole town on a map. And I looked where I was and where he is. And I thought, well, he gave me a roundabout damn way to get to his house. This is a lot better way to go right here. So I went that lot better way. And I got there. He said, "Is that you, Meineke?" I'm not supposed to say my last name. It's an open meeting. "Is that you, Rich?" "Yeah." He said, "Come on in. Sit down." I said, "Okay." He said, "You didn't follow my directions, did you?" I wondered how the hell he knew. He said, "I gave you a way to come. You couldn't possibly be here. You came on so-and-so and Roosevelt and came down over here this way." No. "Yeah." He said, "I don't think I can sponsor you. You can't follow directions." He had me. He had me. He said, "I'm going to give you a second chance. But if you ever fail to follow directions, we're done. Because I told you I take this seriously. And if you don't, that's fine. Find you somebody else." Now, I needed that dictatorial sponsor. I needed that because I'm arrogant and I think I'm smarter than anybody at my worst. At my best, I'm a humble, nice guy. But I wasn't at my best back in them days. So Robert worked with me. Today, 32 years later, Robert's still my sponsor. He lives in Little Rock, and I live in North Carolina, and he's still my sponsor. I don't even talk to him that much anymore because he's up here in my head. When I'm puzzling about something, I already know what Robert's going to say. I don't have to call him and ask him. He wants to know how I'm doing. But I want him to tell me what to do, but I already know what he's going to say. I know him that well, and he knows me that well. So Alcoholics Anonymous is a fellowship that has a program of recovery. It's the 12-step program. I'm a big book believer. I'm a 12-step walker. I practice the traditions. We read the traditions. The traditions do two things. They tell groups what the boundaries are and how to function in the communities that they live in and how to interact with society at large. And they tell individuals how to behave in that society at large. They tell us what we're not supposed to do. Don't do this stuff. The traditions were hammered out on the anvil of experience. People had to die drunk as the AAs found their way through the morass of different ways that alcoholics can figure out to screw up a program that works. And the traditions is what came out of that. And it took a couple of decades to work that out. Pretty near. And if you want to be a member in good standing, you need to have a working knowledge of the traditions as a group member and as an individual. The steps are for recovery, and the group and the traditions are how to behave as a group. The concepts are about service. And I did a lot of service work at the area level back in Arkansas, Area 3. I did not nearly so much here in North Carolina because of the logistics and my professional obligations. So now I'm going on 75 years old, and I'm no longer in the workforce. I just do a little bit of part-time work. I've slowed way down. I suspect because of my history with drinking and drugging, I've had cardiovascular problems and other health problems that dictate what I can and can't do. And I'm not happy about it, but I learned how to surrender. I didn't like it when the doctor told me I had to get a stent. I didn't like it when the doctor told me I had to have a heart surgery. But you know what? I had to trust them. I had to surrender. I had to trust them, just like I had to trust you all. When I was at a point where I was powerless over my heart condition, I understood powerlessness. And I had to trust somebody that knew how to help me when I didn't know how to help myself. So this program taught me how to live life on life's terms in life and death ways. And I'm grateful for that. This is a program where, unlike any other program I've ever seen or heard of, you get a chance to have a ringside seat on miracles. You get to be one and you get to watch them happen. People come in here, ball of pain and confusion, full of self-disgust and self-loathing, and stop drinking and maybe some other stuff they cut out, and in about a month they start coming out of the fog, and you see personalities emerge that are some of the most colorful, interesting, creative, sparkling people that you'll ever find in your whole life. And they have a special handle on living because they have a way out of something that was a trap, the jaws of which they could not spring. So they've had to become humble and teachable at the same time. And that changes people. That changes people in miraculous ways. There's people in this room right now that know me and I know them. And I've watched some of you all. I've watched a miracle happen inside of you. And some of you are up ahead of me. And you were around when I showed up. And you'd be the first to know that that's what happened to me. If you're new in here, put your hand up. Less than a year is new. Okay? This program has so much to offer that you can't even imagine right now, that I would strongly suggest that you find a sponsor that's sober, that lives the steps, and that has a sponsor that taught them how to do that, and that you follow their directions, and there's hope for you. Now I've run out of time. It's poem time. The wonderful love of a beautiful maid, the love of a staunch true man, the love of a baby unafraid, has existed since time began. But the greatest love, the love of loves, even greater than that of a mother, is the tender, passionate, infinite love of one drunken bum for another. Thank you all for having me.